The anonymous letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked under my office door at the church. Check the building fund account. Pastor Williams has been lying to all of you. I almost threw it away, dismissing it as gossip from a disgruntled member. But something nagged at me. As the church's volunteer bookkeeper with access to financial records that others didn't have, I couldn't shake the accusation. What I found in those statements would reveal millions stolen from our congregation and destroy everything I believed about the man we called our shepherd. It would take months of careful planning to expose him properly to everyone who trusted him completely. Pastor Williams commanded respect the moment he entered any room. Tall and distinguished with silver hair that caught the light just right, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who truly believed in his mission. For 15 years, he had been the foundation of our church community, the person we turned to during our darkest moments and celebrated with during our brightest. When my father died unexpectedly 3 years ago, Pastor Williams sat with our family for hours, never checking his watch, never making us feel rushed in our grief. When the Hendersons faced bankruptcy, he spent weeks helping them create a budget and negotiate with creditors. The Martinez family received groceries for months after the father lost his job, all arranged quietly through his network of connections. Every Sunday morning, Pastor Williams delivered sermons about honesty and stewardship that left the congregation energized and inspired. "Every dollar that passes through these doors is sacred," he would say, his eyes scanning the congregation. "We are accountable not just to each other, but to the one who provides everything we have." His personal counseling sessions became legendary in our community, and he never publicized these acts of service, but word spread anyway, because that's how small communities work. My role as volunteer bookkeeper started innocently enough. The previous bookkeeper had moved away, and Pastor Williams approached me after service one Sunday. "Stephanie, I know you work in accounting at the bank," he said, with that warm smile that made refusal impossible. "Would you consider helping us keep our financial records straight? It's not glamorous work, but it's important." I agreed immediately, honored that he trusted me with such responsibility. Pastor Williams gave me complete access to the church accounts, never questioning my methods or asking for detailed reports. "You're the expert," he would say whenever I offered to explain something. "I trust your judgment completely." The congregation's trust in Pastor Williams ran so deep that financial oversight became almost non-existent. Board meetings rarely discussed specific expenditures because everyone assumed our pastor would never make questionable decisions. When he requested funds for building maintenance or emergency assistance, the board approved without hesitation. "Pastor Williams knows what's needed," became the standard response to any financial question. His stance against materialism made his credibility even stronger. Pastor Williams drove a modest sedan that was at least 8 years old and lived in the small parsonage beside the church. He regularly preached against the dangers of wealth, warning the congregation about how money could corrupt even the most faithful hearts. "I've seen good men destroyed by greed," he would say, his voice heavy with concern. "We must guard ourselves against the temptation to serve money instead of God." The Building Fund campaign began 6 months ago with Pastor Williams's announcement that God had called our church to expand. Our current sanctuary could barely hold 200 people, and Sunday services had become uncomfortably crowded. "I've prayed about this for months," he told the congregation, his voice filled with conviction. "God has shown me a vision of what this church can become." He presented architectural drawings for a new sanctuary that would seat 500, complete with modern sound equipment and expanded children's facilities. The projected cost was $1.2 million, a staggering amount for our modest congregation. When that anonymous letter appeared under my office door, my first instinct was protective anger. Someone was trying to damage our pastor's reputation with baseless accusations. The idea that he would steal from the very people he served seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. I remembered his compassionate presence during my father's death, his tireless work for struggling families, and felt ashamed for even considering the possibility. But the letter gnawed at me in ways I couldn't shake. As days passed, I found myself remembering small details that hadn't seemed significant before. The way Pastor Williams sometimes became evasive when discussing specific building costs. His recent purchases of expensive suits that seemed inconsistent with his modest lifestyle. After 2 weeks of internal struggle, I made a decision that felt like betrayal, even as I knew it was necessary. I would check the building fund account, not because I believed the accusations, but because I needed to put this doubt to rest once and for all. I opened my laptop and logged into the church's banking system. The first discovery hit me like a physical blow. $50,000 should have been sitting in the building fund account. According to the bank statement dated March 15th, a transfer from the general fund had been processed, but when I cross-referenced it with our internal ledger, the money had vanished. My hands trembled as I stared at the computer screen, hoping I had made some basic accounting error. I checked the transaction 3 times, traced every entry, and verified the account numbers. The money was gone. What started as a simple verification became an obsession. I began arriving at the church office 2 hours early, staying late into the evening, methodically working backward through months of financial records. The pattern emerged slowly at first, then with terrifying clarity. Transfers that didn't match their descriptions. Vendor payments that seemed unusually high for routine maintenance. Emergency fund disbursements that had no corresponding family requests or documentation. The fake vendor accounts were sophisticated. Pastor Williams had created Cornerstone Maintenance Solutions and Superior Church Services, along with several others. Each company had legitimate-sounding names and properly formatted invoices. But when I researched their business licenses and tax identification numbers, these companies existed only on paper. Every payment to these fabricated vendors traced back to accounts controlled by Pastor Williams. The invoices showed inflated costs for everything from carpet cleaning to sound equipment maintenance, sometimes charging 3 times the actual market rate. Following the electronic trail led me to discoveries that made my stomach turn. Pastor Williams owned a lake house in the mountains, purchased 18 months ago for $400,000 in cash. The down payment matched exactly with a series of emergency fund transfers that had supposedly gone to help hurricane victims in neighboring states. The timing coincided with our special missions offering, when families had sacrificed vacation money and Christmas budgets to support what they believed was overseas ministry work. His manipulation of the Emergency Assistance Fund represented the cruelest betrayal. When elderly Mrs. Patterson needed help with her medical bills, Pastor Williams announced from the pulpit that the church would cover her expenses. The congregation donated generously, but Mrs. Patterson received only a fraction of what was collected. The remainder disappeared into Pastor Williams's accounts. The same pattern repeated with the Johnson family's house fire, the Rodriguez medical emergency, and countless other crises where our church family opened their hearts and wallets. I photographed every document, every bank statement, every forged signature. My home office became a war room filled with manila folders organized by date and type of theft. I purchased a fireproof safe to store the originals and uploaded digital copies to multiple cloud storage accounts. Each piece of evidence was cataloged with detailed notes explaining the discrepancy and the amount stolen. Pastor Williams had become remarkably skilled at covering his tracks. He produced fake bank statements for board meetings, showing healthy account balances that didn't exist. He forged board approval signatures on transfer authorizations, creating a paper trail that suggested proper oversight. His computer contained duplicate financial software that generated false reports, while the real accounts showed the devastating truth. The falsified board approvals were masterful forgeries, Pastor Williams had studied each board member's signature until he could reproduce them perfectly. As the evidence mounted, the true scope of his theft became clear. Over 3 years, Pastor Williams had stolen $2.84 million from our church. The building fund had been depleted. The emergency assistance fund was nearly empty. The memorial fund, where families donated in honor of deceased loved ones, had been raided repeatedly. Even the children's ministry budget had been systematically pillaged to fund his lifestyle. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on me like a physical force. I now possessed irrefutable evidence that our spiritual leader had been systematically stealing from the very people who trusted him most. But I also understood that Pastor Williams commanded tremendous loyalty and respect. If I confronted him privately, he could spin the situation, destroy evidence, or simply deny everything. His word would carry more weight than mine with most congregation members. I needed to build a case so comprehensive and undeniable that even Pastor Williams's most devoted supporters would be forced to accept the truth. But as I sat surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, the full emotional impact of what I had discovered began to settle over me. Sleep became impossible. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through every sermon Pastor Williams had delivered about integrity and stewardship. Each memory felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. The man I had looked up to for years, the person who had comforted me through my father's death and celebrated with me during my daughter's high school graduation, had been living a complete lie. Every word of compassion, every prayer he had offered on my behalf, every moment of spiritual guidance now felt contaminated by his deception. The questioning consumed me. If Pastor Williams could deceive us so completely, what did that say about my ability to judge character? How could I trust my own faith when the person who had shaped it was a fraud? I found myself doubting every religious conviction I had held, wondering if my entire spiritual foundation had been built on the words of a con artist. The church had been my sanctuary, the place where I felt closest to God, but now even sitting in the pews felt like participating in a massive lie. My internal debate raged for weeks. Part of me wanted to confront Pastor Williams privately, to give him a chance to explain or make things right. But the evidence was too clear, too systematic to be anything other than deliberate theft. A private confrontation would only give him time to destroy evidence or craft a convincing story to turn the congregation against me. The fear of not being believed haunted my every waking moment. Pastor Williams commanded respect and loyalty that I could never match. He was the beloved shepherd who had guided our church through difficult times, while I was just the volunteer bookkeeper who handled mundane financial tasks. If it came down to his word against mine, most congregation members would side with him without hesitation. Sunday mornings became torture. I would sit in my usual pew, watching Pastor Williams deliver passionate sermons about honesty and faithful stewardship, knowing that every word was pure hypocrisy. When he spoke about the importance of transparency in handling God's resources, I wanted to scream. When he praised the congregation for their generous building fund donations, my stomach churned with rage. The Patel family broke my heart the most. They ran a small grocery store that barely turned a profit, but they had committed to donating $50 every month to the building fund. Mrs. Patel worked 12-hour days to make ends meet, and their teenage son had taken a part-time job to help with family expenses. They believed their sacrifice was helping build something meaningful for their church community. The elderly widows who donated portions of their Social Security checks felt the same way. All of them were being systematically robbed by the man they trusted most. My faith crisis deepened as I realized the extent of the manipulation. Pastor Williams hadn't just stolen money, he had weaponized our spiritual beliefs against us. He used our trust in God to silence questions about financial accountability. He leveraged our faith to guilt congregation members into giving beyond their means. He had turned our church into his personal bank account while convincing us that questioning him would be questioning God himself. My routine became a careful performance. I smiled and made small talk with congregation members while internally screaming about the injustice they were experiencing. I maintained my normal bookkeeping duties while secretly photographing evidence of their pastor's crimes. I participated in building fund discussions while knowing the money was being stolen faster than we could raise it. The decision crystallized when Pastor Williams announced another special collection for emergency assistance. Watching him stand at the pulpit, his voice filled with false compassion as he described families in need, I realized that my silence was making me part of his crime. Every day I said nothing was another day he could steal from people who trusted him. My faith community deserved better than a leader who viewed them as marks in his personal con game. I needed more evidence, something so comprehensive that even his most devoted supporters couldn't deny the truth. The photographs and bank records I had collected were damning, but I needed to understand the full scope of his operation. My investigation required the patience of a hunter. I developed a careful routine of arriving early and staying late, always with legitimate reasons. Tuesday mornings became my research time because Pastor Williams attended district meetings across town. I would lock the office door and systematically photograph documents with my phone, organizing each image by date and account number. Two key breakthroughs transformed my suspicions into undeniable proof. Linda Morrison had handled our books for 6 years before suddenly resigning 18 months ago. When I called her at home, her voice became guarded the moment I mentioned church finances. After careful conversation, she admitted that Pastor Williams had pressured her to resign when she questioned discrepancies in the emergency fund. Carol Jensen, who had worked part-time in our office 3 years ago, told a similar story. Pastor Williams had eliminated her position immediately after she asked about unusual vendor payments. Both women had suspected something was wrong but feared no one would believe them against such a respected pastor. The second breakthrough came when I discovered Pastor Williams's hidden records in his private office filing cabinet, locked away behind folders labeled sermon notes and pastoral care records. The key hung on his personal keychain, but he often left it on his desk when stepping out for brief conversations. These secret books revealed the true scope of his operation. While the official records showed modest account balances and appropriate expenditures, the hidden ledgers tracked his actual theft with meticulous detail. He had documented every fraudulent transaction, every fake vendor payment, every stolen dollar with the precision of an accountant. Memorial fund theft represented his most heartless crimes. When George Hartwell died last year, his family requested donations go toward new hymnals in his memory. The congregation raised nearly $8,000, but only $1,200 was actually spent on hymnals. Pastor Williams had skimmed the rest, recording the theft in his secret books with a simple notation: memorial surplus, transferred. The Patterson family memorial for their teenage son who died in a car accident had been similarly plundered. These families believed their loved ones were being honored through lasting contributions to the church, while Pastor Williams treated their grief as profit opportunities. Recording Pastor Williams required careful timing and positioning. During our monthly financial review meeting, I activated the recorder in my pocket while discussing building fund projections. His voice was clear as he outlined plans for requesting additional donations from the congregation, money he intended to steal through his established vendor fraud system. He spoke casually about manipulating the board's approval process, confident that no one questioned his authority. The recording captured him laughing about how easily congregation members accepted his explanations for increased building costs. My evidence collection grew into a comprehensive prosecution case: bank statements, canceled checks, credit card records, property deeds, vehicle registrations, contractor quotes, vendor correspondence, and financial software screenshots filled 3 large binders, each document cross-referenced with dates and amounts, creating an undeniable timeline of systematic theft. The consultation with attorney Michael Torres confirmed that Pastor Williams had committed multiple felonies, including embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. The evidence would easily support criminal prosecution, but Torres advised immediate police contact. I had already decided on a different approach that would ensure maximum accountability. Pastor Williams was scheduled to present the Building Fund progress report to the full congregation in 2 weeks. If I contacted police beforehand, he might flee or destroy evidence. A public exposure during Sunday service would prevent his escape, while ensuring the congregation learned the truth directly from me, not through secondhand reports or legal proceedings they might not understand. The plan crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. I would let Pastor Williams deliver his fraudulent presentation about our church's bright financial future, then stand before the congregation with irrefutable proof of his betrayal. The timing had to be precise, the evidence organized flawlessly, and my resolve unshakable. Everything depended on that Sunday morning. Saturday night, I organized the evidence one final time. 3 identical binders sat on my kitchen table, each containing bank statements, forged documents, photographs, and financial records spanning 3 years of theft. I sealed copies in separate envelopes addressed to the district attorney, the local newspaper, and my attorney. The originals went into my briefcase along with the digital recorder and backup flash drives. Every piece of evidence had been photographed and uploaded to cloud storage accounts Pastor Williams could never access or delete. Sunday morning arrived with unusual clarity, and I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit. The church parking lot was fuller than usual when I arrived 30 minutes before service. Pastor Williams stood at the main entrance greeting congregation members with his characteristic warmth and genuine smile. He shook hands with elderly Mr. Peterson, laughed at something Mrs. Dowd whispered, and bent down to high-five the Rodriguez children. Watching him interact with people he had been systematically stealing from made my stomach clench. These families trusted him completely, and he was using that trust to rob them blind. The irony of his sermon topic hit me the moment I read the bulletin. Faithful stewardship, trusting God's provision in uncertain times. Pastor Williams had chosen to preach about financial trust and God's faithfulness on the very day I would expose his massive theft. He spoke passionately about how God provides for his people through faithful servants who handle resources with integrity and transparency. His voice carried its usual conviction as he quoted scripture about honest dealing and warned against the corruption that money could bring to even the most devoted hearts. My internal tension built with every word he spoke. Sitting in my usual fifth-row pew, I gripped my briefcase handle while Pastor Williams elaborated on the importance of trust between spiritual leaders and their congregations. He emphasized how sacred that relationship was, how devastating it would be if a pastor ever betrayed the faith placed in him. The congregation nodded in agreement, hanging on every word from the man who had been betraying them for years. Janet Morrison from the local newspaper sat in the back row, having agreed to attend after I explained I had evidence of significant financial misconduct at a prominent local church. Detective Julie Lang from the district attorney's white-collar crime unit occupied a middle pew, dressed casually but alert. Both women believed they were investigating a tip about possible embezzlement, not knowing they were about to witness a public exposure. The sanctuary held more people than I had seen in months. Over 400 congregation members filled every pew and lined the walls for Pastor Williams's Building Fund presentation. Families had brought children who rarely attended regular services. Board members sat in their traditional front section. The youth group occupied their usual corner. Everyone wanted to hear about the progress on our new sanctuary and learn when construction might begin. Pastor Williams radiated confidence as he approached the podium for his financial presentation. He carried a thick folder of what appeared to be construction documents and progress reports. His smile was broad and genuine as he thanked the congregation for their generous support and faithful giving. He spoke about how God was blessing our Building Fund campaign beyond his wildest expectations, claiming we were ahead of schedule on fundraising goals. A moment of doubt crashed over me as he began detailing architectural plans and timeline projections. These people loved Pastor Williams. They had followed his spiritual leadership for 15 years, trusted him with their deepest concerns, and believed in his vision for their church's future. Exposing him would devastate them in ways that might never fully heal. Some would lose their faith entirely. Others would struggle to trust religious leadership again. The damage would ripple through families and friendships for years. But watching him request additional building fund donations while knowing he had already stolen most of the money crystallized my resolve. Pastor Williams stood at the pulpit asking struggling families to sacrifice even more for a project he was funding through theft. The Hendersons, still recovering from near bankruptcy, raised their hands to pledge another monthly contribution. The elderly Mrs. Patterson, living on Social Security, nodded when he suggested increasing her donation. These people were being victimized by someone they viewed as God's representative. Pastor Williams paused his presentation and looked directly at the congregation. I'm asking each family to prayerfully consider increasing your building fund commitment, he said, his voice filled with pastoral authority. God has great plans for this church, but we need your continued faithfulness. I stood up. My voice carried clearly through the sanctuary, cutting through his donation appeal. Pastor Williams, I need to address the congregation about our church finances. The silence that followed was absolute. 400 people turned in their seats to stare at me, confusion written across their faces. Pastor Williams froze at the podium, his confident smile faltering as his eyes met mine. Stephanie, this isn't the appropriate time, he said, attempting to maintain his pastoral authority. We can discuss any concerns after service in my office. His voice carried a slight tremor that I had never heard before. He knew. Something in my tone or the way I held my briefcase told him that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the dead silence. Actually, Pastor Williams, this is exactly the right time. The congregation deserves to know where their building fund donations have really been going. His face went pale as I reached the front of the sanctuary. I don't know what you think you've discovered, Pastor Williams said, his voice rising with desperation, but I won't allow you to disrupt this service with unfounded accusations. He stepped away from the podium, positioning himself between me and the microphone. Stephanie has been under tremendous stress lately. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first binder of evidence. For the past 3 months, I've been investigating financial irregularities in our church accounts. What I found was systematic theft totaling $2.84 million over 3 years. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth with her hands. Pastor Williams laughed nervously, shaking his head. This is absurd. Stephanie, you're obviously confused about some routine financial transfers. I opened the binder and pulled out the first bank statement. This is the building fund account from March 15th. According to our records, there should be $450,000 in this account. The actual balance is $89,000. I held up the statement for the front rows to see. That's enough, Pastor Williams snapped, reaching for my binder. But his hands were shaking as he grabbed for the evidence. When he touched the bank statement, he saw the account numbers, the dates, the irrefutable proof of his theft. His confident mask crumbled completely. I pulled out photographs of the fake vendor invoices. Cornerstone Maintenance Solutions, Superior Church Services. These companies don't exist. Pastor Williams created them to steal your donations. The congregation began murmuring, their voices growing louder as understanding dawned. Board members in the front row were studying the documents I held, their faces filled with horror. "You don't understand the complexities of church finance," Pastor Williams said weakly. "There are legitimate explanations for all of this." But his voice had lost all authority. He stumbled backward against the communion table, gripping its edge for support. I held up photographs of his lake house. This $400,000 vacation home was purchased with money stolen from our emergency assistance fund. While Mrs. Patterson struggled to pay her medical bills, Pastor Williams was buying luxury property. The congregation erupted in angry voices. Several people stood up, demanding explanations. The breaking point came when I revealed the memorial fund theft. When the Hartwell family requested donations for hymnals in George's memory, you raised $8,000. Pastor Williams stole $6,800 of that money. The congregation's anger turned to rage. People began shouting, demanding answers, calling for police. Pastor Williams collapsed into the chair behind the pulpit. His breathing became labored, his face flushed red, then pale again. The weight of 15 years of lies and manipulation crushed down on him in a single moment. "I can explain," he whispered, but no explanation could undo what everyone had just witnessed. "I'm sorry," Pastor Williams finally said, his voice barely audible. "God forgive me. I'm so sorry." The admission echoed through the sanctuary like thunder, confirming every accusation I had made. Detective Lang was already moving forward, speaking quietly into her phone while the congregation surrounded the altar area, their trust shattered by the man they had believed in most. Detective Lang reached Pastor Williams within minutes, and two uniformed officers followed her down the center aisle. Pastor Williams offered no resistance as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his shoulders slumping forward in complete defeat. The sight of their respected spiritual leader being arrested in front of 400 witnesses created a surreal moment that none of us would ever forget. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once prosecutors reviewed my evidence. Pastor Williams pled guilty to 12 felony counts including embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and theft from a nonprofit organization. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in state prison with mandatory restitution of $2.84 million, specifically noting the breach of trust involved in stealing from congregation members who relied on his spiritual guidance. Federal marshals seized his lake house, luxury vehicles, and personal bank accounts, with asset sales recovering most of the stolen building fund money. Our congregation faced the enormous task of rebuilding trust and financial oversight systems. We implemented dual signatures on all expenditures over $500, monthly public reporting of account balances, mandatory board approval for vendor contracts, quarterly independent audits, and rotating bookkeeper responsibilities. The board appointed me as interim financial administrator while establishing clear communication about our actual financial position. The healing process proved more complex than anyone anticipated. Some families left our church immediately, unable to separate the building from their memories of betrayal. Others struggled with fundamental questions about religious authority and institutional trust. We organized support groups led by counselors who specialized in religious trauma, providing safe spaces for congregation members to process their anger and confusion. The children's ministry suffered significant losses as parents questioned whether any church environment was truly safe. Recovery required acknowledging that Pastor Williams's crimes had damaged more than our bank accounts. He had weaponized our faith against us, using our spiritual beliefs to facilitate his theft. Rebuilding meant creating new relationships with interim pastors who understood the depth of our trust issues. We required complete financial transparency from any potential leadership candidates and established clear boundaries around pastoral authority over church funds. My investigation had inadvertently protected other churches from becoming his next victims. Police discovered that Pastor Williams had been interviewing for senior pastor positions at two congregations in neighboring counties. His arrest prevented him from moving to another community where he could have repeated his crimes with new victims. The district attorney's office contacted those churches to warn them about his criminal background and methods of operation. Our experience became a case study for religious organizations nationwide. Seminary schools invited me to speak about financial accountability in church leadership. The State Religious Affairs Office developed new oversight requirements for nonprofit religious institutions, based partly on our situation. 3 dozen churches implemented similar financial safeguards after learning about our experience through denominational networks. 6 months after the exposure, the families who remained were stronger and more engaged than before. We had learned that protecting each other sometimes requires uncomfortable action, even when that action challenges authority we have always respected. The building fund contained enough money for essential repairs and modest expansion rather than the grandiose vision Pastor Williams had promoted. But our scaled-back plans reflected genuine community needs instead of one man's fraudulent ambitions. The congregation's initial shock had given way to a deeper understanding of institutional accountability. Within hours of Pastor Williams's arrest, 3 former board members contacted me with concerns they had harbored for months, but never voiced. Their stories painted a picture of systematic intimidation designed to silence anyone who asked uncomfortable questions. We realized that creating space for those questions was essential for preventing future abuse. Standing in our sanctuary 6 months later, watching families worship together despite everything we had endured, I understood that exposing Pastor Williams had preserved our faith community rather than destroying it. The path forward required acknowledging uncomfortable truths about power, trust, and the courage needed to protect vulnerable people from those who would exploit them. That investigation taught me that ordinary people possess extraordinary power when they choose to act on uncomfortable truths. One person's willingness to ask difficult questions prevented years of additional theft from families who could barely afford their donations. My decision to expose Pastor Williams proved that protecting others sometimes requires challenging the very authority we've been taught to respect without question. Financial transparency isn't optional in organizations built on trust. When people donate their hard-earned money based on faith and respect, they deserve complete accountability from leadership. The courage to investigate, document, and expose wrongdoing can save entire communities from continued exploitation. If you've witnessed institutional misconduct or struggled with whether to speak up against trusted authority figures, share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who chose justice over comfort.